Want to get rich? Then right now, remember these 6 things.
If you keep doing them, money will keep avoiding you, no matter how hard you work. I'm going to show you the 6 most dangerous habits that destroy wealth for 95% of people. And the craziest part? Most of them look completely harmless.
Want to get rich? Then right now, remember these 6 things. If you keep doing them, money will keep avoiding you. I'm going to show you the 6 most dangerous habits that destroy wealth for 95% of people. And the craziest part? The first one is probably killing your money right now.
I, John D. Rockefeller, have lived long enough and accumulated enough wealth to know one truth that escapes most men. Becoming rich is less about what you do and far more about what you refuse to do. The world is full of clever fellows who chase opportunities, study markets, and labor from sunrise to midnight, yet die poor or modestly comfortable at best. Why? Because they never learned the discipline of avoidance. They never understood that wealth is built not by addition alone, but by ruthless subtraction of everything that drains a man's capital, time, and judgment. I have been called many things in my time: monopolist, oil baron, the richest man in America, the coldest businessman who ever lived. I accept these labels without protest. What I will not accept is the foolish notion that my fortune was built on luck, timing, or some special genius of the markets. It was built on discipline. It was built on the things I said no to, more than the things I said yes to. And in this discourse I shall lay before you the 6 habits, attitudes, and behaviors that any man seeking true wealth must avoid if he wishes to walk the road I walked.
Listen carefully. I do not speak to entertain you. I speak to instruct you. If you absorb what I say and act upon it with the seriousness it deserves, your life shall change. If you treat it as mere reading material to be forgotten by tomorrow, then you deserve the poverty that awaits you.
Introduction. Why avoidance matters more than action. In my long career building Standard Oil from a small refinery in Cleveland into the most powerful industrial enterprise the world had ever seen, I learned that the average man fails at wealth building not because he lacks intelligence or opportunity, but because he carries within him a set of poisonous habits that bleed him dry day after day, year after year. He wonders why his neighbor prospers while he stagnates. He blames the economy, his employer, his family circumstances, his luck. He never blames the only thing that truly matters: his own conduct. When I was a young clerk in Cleveland earning 50 cents a day at Hewitt & Tuttle, I made a decision that shaped my entire life. I purchased a small ledger book. I called it Ledger A, and in it I recorded every single penny I earned and every single penny I spent, not approximately, exactly, to the cent. And as I reviewed those entries each evening, I began to see patterns. I saw where money flowed in. I saw where money flowed out. I saw the leaks in the ship, and I plugged them, one by one, with the discipline of a man who understood that a dollar saved was as good as a dollar earned, and often better, because the saved dollar was already in hand and required no further effort to acquire. This habit of relentless self-examination taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Most men do not fail because of what their enemies do to them. They fail because of what they do to themselves. And so I present to you the 6 things you must avoid. 6 poisons that have ruined more fortunes than any panic, depression, or war in history. The first avoidance: never live beyond your means, no matter how modest those means may be. This is the foundation of everything. If you cannot master this single principle, the other 5 matter not at all, for you shall never have capital to invest, capital to deploy, capital to compound. You shall be a slave to your creditors and a beggar at the door of every opportunity that comes your way. The disease of living beyond one's means is not new, but in this modern age of easy credit, advertising, and the ceaseless display of wealth in the public eye, it has become an epidemic. Men purchase houses they cannot afford, carriages, or shall I say automobiles, they have no business owning, garments fit for kings, while their bank accounts are emptier than a dry well. They confuse the appearance of wealth with the substance of wealth. And the difference between these 2 things is the difference between heaven and hell. When I earned my first wages, I saved more than half. When my income rose, I did not raise my expenses to match. I raised my savings. I raised my investments. I raised the capital that would one day be deployed to build empires. My wife Seti, whom I loved deeply, shared this philosophy. We lived simply for many years, even when our wealth was growing into figures that would have shocked the average citizen. We did not buy luxury for the sake of luxury. We did not parade our prosperity. We let our prosperity do what prosperity is meant to do: compound, multiply, and build further prosperity. I have seen countless men ruined by the simple inability to say no to themselves. They earn $10,000 and spend 11. They earn 100,000 and spend 110. They earn $1 million and find ways to spend $1.5 million. The amount of income is irrelevant. The discipline of consuming less than one earns is everything. A man who earns $5,000 a year and saves 1,000 of it is wealthier in his trajectory than a man who earns 50,000 and saves none, because the first man is building, while the second is merely consuming his way to the grave. Consider this practical principle. Every dollar you spend today is a dollar that cannot work for you tomorrow. Money is a soldier. Send it out to fight for you, and it shall return with reinforcements. Spend it on baubles and pleasures, and it shall vanish into the wind, never to be seen again. The man who understands this lives modestly while young, and the man who understands it not lives modestly when old, for poverty and old age awaits all those who consumed their soldiers in the foolish wars of vanity.
In the modern world, this poison is delivered to you through every screen, every billboard, every advertisement that whispers in your ear that you deserve more, that you must keep up, that without this product or that experience you are somehow less of a man. Reject this gospel utterly. The men who build true wealth are almost universally indifferent to the opinions of their neighbors regarding their consumption. They live below their means deliberately, and they laugh quietly at those who borrow heavily to project an image of prosperity they have not earned. The second, avoidance. Never surrender your time to activities that do not build, earn, or educate. Time, my young friend, is the only resource a man cannot manufacture more of. I could create wealth, I could create companies, I could create entire industries where none existed before. But not even I, John D. Rockefeller, could create a single additional minute of life, and neither can you. Yet how do most men spend this most precious of all commodities? They squander it. They fritter it away in trivialities. They sit in idle conversation. They consume entertainment that teaches them nothing and prepares them for nothing. They engage in pastimes that drain their energy without strengthening their minds, their bodies, or their finances. And then they reach the age of 50 or 60 and wonder where their lives went, while they have nothing to show for the decades they were granted. I divided my time with the precision of a chemist measuring reagents. There was time for work, and that time was sacred, undisturbed, focused entirely on the building of my enterprises. There was time for study, for I was always reading reports, examining figures, learning the chemistry of petroleum, studying the behavior of markets and men. There was time for family, for I was no neglectful father, and my children received the moral and practical education they required. There was time for prayer and reflection, for I never abandoned the religious convictions of my upbringing. And there was time for rest, because a man cannot work effectively if he does not rest properly. But there was no time for nonsense, no time for gossip, no time for the petty entertainments that consumed the lives of my contemporaries. While other men sat in saloons and clubs discussing horse races and political scandals, I was studying balance sheets and meeting with engineers. While other men chased women of low character and indulged in drink, I was at home with my family or in my office reviewing operations. The compounding effect of these choices, made daily over decades, was the difference between my fortune and theirs. Now, in your modern era, the thieves of time are even more numerous and more cunning than they were in mine. The little machine you carry in your pocket is the greatest devourer of human potential ever invented. It steals hours from you while you imagine you are merely passing a few minutes. It fills your mind with the trivial concerns of strangers, the manufactured outrages of the day, the empty calories of digital amusement. Every hour you give to it is an hour stolen from your wealth, your education, your health, and your future. I make this prescription to you. Examine your day with the same ruthlessness with which I examined my ledgers. Where does your time go? How many hours are spent in true productivity? How many in study and improvement? How many in the cultivation of valuable relationships? And how many, be honest now, how many are squandered on activities that produce nothing, teach nothing, and build nothing? Identify those hours and reclaim them. They are the bricks from which the house of your fortune shall be built. The third, avoidance. Never place your trust in singular sources of income. This is a principle that came to me hard through experience and observation in my early days in commerce. I watched merchants who depended on a single customer be ruined when that customer changed his patronage. I watched men who relied on a single trade be impoverished when that trade fell out of fashion. I watched workers who depended entirely on a single employer find themselves destitute when that employer closed his doors or dismissed them in a panic.
A wise man does not stand on one leg, he stands on many, and the more legs his prosperity stands upon, the more difficult it becomes for the storms of fortune to knock him down.
When I built Standard Oil, I did not merely refine oil. I built pipelines. I built railroad agreements. I built barrel manufacturing operations. I built distribution networks. I built export businesses. I built into chemicals and byproducts that other refiners discarded as worthless. Every part of the petroleum business that could yield $1 of profit, I sought to control or to participate in. And when oil itself was at last challenged by other industries, my wealth had already diversified into railroads, banks, real estate, mining, and 100 other enterprises that ensured no single failure could ruin me. Many men in my time made fortunes in one industry and refused to look beyond it. When that industry declined, so did they. I knew an iron magnate who believed iron would rule forever and put nothing into other ventures. When steel surpassed iron, he was bankrupt within 5 years. I knew a railroad man who believed his line was eternal and invested nothing outside it. When new technologies emerged, his railroad lost its monopoly position and his fortune evaporated. In your present age, the principle remains identical, though the specific industries change. The man who depends entirely upon his salary from a single employer is one corporate decision away from poverty. The man who has only one stream of income, no matter how generous that stream may appear, is fundamentally fragile. The man who owns no productive assets, only his labor, is selling the most precious hours of his life for wages that cannot compound, cannot multiply, and cannot work for him while he sleeps. Build multiple sources of income, acquire dividend-paying securities, acquire real estate that produces rents, build small businesses that generate cash flows independent of your daily presence. Educate yourself in skills that can be monetized in many directions. Make yourself anti-fragile. Make yourself such that the failure of any single source of income inconveniences you, but does not destroy you. This is how the wealthy think, and this is why the wealthy remain wealthy across generations, while ordinary men rise and fall with the tides of single industries and single employers.
The fourth avoidance. Never allow your emotions to direct your financial decisions.
I have observed that the average man is governed by his emotions in matters of money to a degree that would shock him if he could see it from the outside. He buys when others are buying because the contagion of enthusiasm has gripped him. He sells when others are selling because the contagion of fear has overtaken him. He follows the herd into ruin and follows the herd out of opportunity, congratulating himself all the while on his prudence and good sense. This is the path of paupers. This is how fortunes are lost. This is how the great panics of history transferred wealth from the emotional masses to the disciplined few who knew better. I lived through several great panics in my career, 1873, 1893, 1907, and others. Each of these events presented me with extraordinary opportunities, because while other men were paralyzed with terror and selling assets at fractions of their true value, I was a buyer. I purchased oil refineries at prices that represented mere pennies on the dollar of their worth. I acquired competitors who had been driven to desperation by their own emotional reactions to circumstances that, with cold judgment, were merely temporary disturbances in the long progress of industry. The principle here is simple but almost impossibly difficult for most men to practice. In matters of money, you must become as a stone. You must look at numbers. You must look at facts. You must look at long-term trends and fundamental values. And you must utterly disregard the screaming voices in the marketplace, the predictions of doom or euphoria in the press, the emotional swings of your own heart. Buy what is undervalued. Hold what is sound. Sell what no longer serves your portfolio. Do not let the price movements of a single day, or even a single year, shake you from positions taken on solid analysis. I once told a young man who came to me seeking advice on the stock market, "The best investments are made when there is blood in the streets, when others are weeping and gnashing their teeth, when the newspapers prophesy the end of the world. That is precisely when the disciplined investor with capital and patience reaps his greatest rewards. And conversely, when the streets are filled with rejoicing, when every clerk and bootblack is offering tips on the latest hot stock, when the newspapers proclaim a new era of permanent prosperity, that is when the wise man is selling, taking profits, building cash reserves for the next inevitable downturn." In your modern markets, this principle is, if anything, more important than it was in mine. The speed of information, the volatility of prices, the constant chatter of commentators, all of these conspire to inflame your emotions and induce you to act when you should be still, and to be still when you should be acting. The man who can master his emotions in the face of these pressures has an enormous advantage over his fellow investors. He sees the panics and bubbles for what they are, temporary madnesses of the crowd that create permanent opportunities for those with cool heads. The fifth avoidance. Never underestimate the importance of the company you keep. A man becomes, over the course of his life, the average of those with whom he most closely associates. This is not a sentimental observation. It is a hard, observable fact. The men with whom you spend your hours shape your thinking, your standards, your habits, and your ambitions. If you surround yourself with mediocre men of small ambition, you shall become mediocre and small in ambition yourself, no matter what fire of greatness may have once burned within you. If you surround yourself with men of vision, discipline, and accomplishment, those qualities shall enter into you as well by a kind of moral and intellectual osmosis that no man can fully resist. In my own life, I was deliberate to a fault about the company I kept. I sought out partners and associates who were better than I was in some particular respect. Henry Flagler, who became my closest business partner, was a man of unusual sagacity and a brilliant negotiator. From him, I learned much about the structuring of contracts and the management of complex relationships. Samuel Andrews, who was the technical genius behind our refining operations, taught me what I needed to know about the chemistry of petroleum. I surrounded myself with men whose abilities exceeded my own in their particular specialties, and from each of them I drew knowledge that compounded my effectiveness. I also avoided, with great care, the company of certain types of men. I avoided the lazy, because laziness is contagious. I avoided the dishonest, because their dishonesty would eventually be turned upon me. I avoided the pessimistic because their pessimism is poisonous to a builder's spirit. I avoided the gossips because what they say to me about others, they shall surely say to others about me. I avoided the resentful and the envious because their company drained energy without ever returning it. You must understand this principle in its fullest application. The friends you keep in your youth shall determine in large measure the fortunes you accumulate in your maturity. The associates you accept in your business shall determine the integrity and prosperity of your enterprises. The romantic partner you marry shall determine the financial trajectory of your household for decades to come. None of these choices is small. All of them are immense. And the man who selects his company carelessly, on the basis of mere convenience or amusement, pays a price for his carelessness that he cannot fully calculate, until decades later when he sees what he has become. In the present world, this principle extends beyond physical company to the voices you allow into your mind through media. The commentators you listen to, the writers you read, the influences you permit to shape your thinking on money and life, all of these are companions whether you consider them so or not. Choose them with the same care you would choose a business partner. Spend more time with the wise dead than with the foolish living if necessary. Read the writings of men who built true fortunes and lived disciplined lives. Avoid the noisemakers and entertainers who profit from keeping you confused and distracted.
The sixth avoidance. Never believe that wealth will come without patience.
The final and perhaps most important poison to avoid is the disease of impatience. Modern men, even more than my contemporaries, suffer from a desperate desire for instantaneous results. They want wealth in months, not decades. They want to compound a small sum into a great one in a single transaction, rather than through the patient accumulation of advantage over a working lifetime. They are seduced by the rare stories of overnight fortunes and ignore the overwhelming statistical reality that such fortunes are aberrations, not patterns. True wealth, the kind that endures and compounds across generations, is built slowly. It is built through the boring, repetitive, unspectacular work of saving, investing, reinvesting, expanding, and consolidating, year after year, decade after decade. There is no shortcut. There is no magic formula. There is no secret known to a chosen few that allows them to bypass this fundamental law of accumulation. When I began my career, Standard Oil did not become the dominant force in American industry overnight. It took 20 years of relentless work, careful acquisition, ruthless cost control, and patient capital deployment. Each refinery I acquired added to the whole. Each new pipeline reduced costs. Each new market entered expanded the empire. But these were incremental gains, achieved one at a time, through years of effort that would have bored most men to abandonment. The men who tried to compete with me by making bold, sudden gambles almost invariably failed. They overextended themselves. They borrowed too heavily. They moved too quickly into territories they did not understand. Meanwhile, I moved with the deliberate pace of a glacier, slow but irresistible. By the time my competitors realized what was happening, I had already enclosed them on all sides, and they had no choice but to sell to me at terms favorable to my interests. The miracle of compounding requires only two things: a positive rate of return and time. Most men have access to the first. Few have the patience to permit the second. They withdraw their capital. They abandon their plans. They jump from one scheme to another, never permitting any single investment the years it requires to demonstrate its true power. And so their capital remains forever small, while the patient man's capital grows into figures that astonish the impatient when they see them. A modest sum invested at a decent rate of return and left undisturbed for 40 years becomes a substantial fortune. The same sum, churned and traded and switched between schemes for 40 years, produces almost nothing. The difference lies entirely in the discipline of patience. The patient man wins, the impatient man loses. It is as simple and as merciless as that. How to apply these principles in the modern world? Some of you reading this may suppose that my era was simpler, that the rules of wealth building were easier to follow when commerce was less complex and competition less fierce. This is a comforting fiction, but a fiction nonetheless. The rules I have described to you are eternal. They applied to the merchants of ancient Rome. They applied to the bankers of Renaissance Florence. They applied to the industrialists of my own age. And they apply with equal force to the technologists, professionals, and entrepreneurs of your present day. To live below your means in a world that screams at you constantly to consume more requires perhaps even greater discipline than it did in my time. To guard your time against the digital thieves that pursue you every hour requires fortifications more elaborate than those I needed to construct. To diversify your income in an economy that increasingly funnels men into single-employer salaried positions requires more deliberate effort than it did when independent commerce was the normal way of life. To master your emotions in an information environment designed to inflame them requires a degree of psychological strength that few possess. To choose your company carefully when so much of that company comes through screens and feeds rather than face-to-face encounter requires conscious selection rather than passive acceptance. And to maintain patience in a culture that celebrates speed above all things requires you to swim against the current of your entire civilization. But the rewards are the same as they ever were. The man who masters these 6 avoidances shall accumulate wealth as surely in your century as I accumulated wealth in mine. The principles do not change because the technology changes. The principles do not change because the markets change. The principles are rooted in the unchanging nature of money, time, human psychology, and the mathematics of compounding. Conclusion: the hard truth and the call to action. I shall close with the same hardness with which I have spoken throughout. If you take this discourse as merely interesting reading, if you nod your head at my words and then return to your previous habits unchanged, then I have wasted my time and you have wasted yours. The words of John D. Rockefeller, no matter how true, cannot enter your bank account on your behalf. They cannot save the dollars you spend foolishly. They cannot reclaim the hours you waste in trivialities. They cannot substitute for the discipline you must build within yourself. The wealth you seek is on the other side of the things you must avoid. Most men shall not avoid these things because most men prefer the immediate comfort of consumption to the deferred reward of accumulation. They prefer the easy entertainment to the difficult education. They prefer the herd's emotion to the individual's discipline. They prefer the comfort of immediate gratification to the patience of long building. And so most men shall remain where they are, financially speaking, for the entirety of their lives. But you, if you have read this far with attention and seriousness, may yet be different. You may be among the few who recognize that I am telling you the literal truth, that these 6 avoidances are the gates through which all true wealth must pass. You may be among the few who shall close their newspapers, put down their entertainments, examine their finances with cold eyes, restructure their associations with deliberate purpose, and begin tomorrow morning to live according to principles that have built every great fortune in human history. Begin today. Begin with your ledger, your modern equivalent of my ledger A. Examine where your money goes. Cut what does not build. Save aggressively. Invest patiently. Diversify deliberately. Master your emotions. Choose your company. And above all, develop the patience to permit time and compounding to do their inexorable work upon your capital.
This is how I built my fortune. This is how every man who has built a fortune has built it. And this is how you shall build yours, if you are willing to do what most men are not willing to do, in order to live as most men shall not live.
I have given you the truth. The use you make of it is now your responsibility, not mine. Yours in cold and certain prosperity, John D. Rockefeller.